Recording in progress.
Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to welcome a new contributor to the program. Her name is Maria Giannopoulos. Maria, welcome to the show. Take a moment here. For those of us meeting you for the first time, tell us about yourself.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for having me. Like you said, I'm Maria Giannopoulos. I have worked for the last decade at the cross-section of tech, digital, and politics. I'm a digital strategist and work primarily in the new media space. So I am really keen on what's happening with creators and influencers, especially in politics.
Wow. And the landscape there has changed a lot over the years and continues to change. I'm looking at an article you've written for Real Clear Politics, The Battle for the New Media Megaphone. And let's first start by, when we talk about a media megaphone, give me a couple of examples of what someone might associate with that phrase.
Sure. So media megaphone, really thinking about who holds that microphone, who holds the power to get the media to show up, to cover things, and what does that media landscape look like? So for years, we started all the way back, there's radio like we're on right now, and then kind of shifting that landscape. Then you had the big three, you had the networks, and then, shifting some more 24-hour news cycle. But now we have the new media landscape. And the new media landscape is, again, around the clock news, but it comes straight from your cell phone. So people are on all different platforms saying what they want when they want, and they're the decision makers on the agenda. And, no longer is it a newsroom-centered dominated media market. It's more a citizen-centered media market. So we have folks that are covering things that are happening in real time, and they don't need approval from somebody to post right from their smartphone. So that's what we're looking at in the media landscape right now. And that's what I like to say when somebody holds the microphone, because truly our citizens are holding the microphone and it's getting people's messages out there.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time looking back over my shoulder, but is it safe to say that, legacy media, I'm talking TV, radio, newspaper, are on their way out because of the rise of this new media?
I think the dynamics have shifted a lot. You can see even traditional outlets are utilizing social media in order to bolster their own ratings. People are taking to different channels that they own and operate to ensure that they still have a revenue stream, but they're embracing social media and bringing their talent onto TikTok, onto Instagram and other platforms to make sure that they kind of have a piece of that pie too.
When I started my career a couple of years ago, I say tongue in cheek, the big three networks, for instance, they could be reliable and could be counted on to speak for the center and left. And I think that trend continued. But now that they're in decline, can we chart which way does the new media lean, or does it really cover a broader spectrum than before?
So if you read the article that I wrote for Real Clear Politics, you can really see that the new media has really embraced the right. And it's not because, they're doing anything that is, I should say the new media has embraced the right because there are more stars. There are more people that have embraced that culture. And it's kind of indicative of how folks that believe in capitalism, that believe in the free market of ideas are going to operate. They're operating in the new media landscape. And you have tons of folks on the right who have stepped out from their traditional roles at big networks, things like that, and they created their own media brands. And you haven't really seen the same on the left. The left, I couldn't really name kind of a roster of stars in new media, but I definitely can on the right. You have your Ben Shapiro's, you have your Megyn Kelly's, you have a lot of folks on the right who are really embracing the new medium and creating their own companies for it. And I think that that's why they hold that new media megaphone, because they have embraced it more wholeheartedly than the folks on the left.
There's a statistic you quote in your story about just last year alone. Team Trump, the Trump War Room, earned 5 billion impressions across X, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Truth Social. And then you put it in perspective. And the perspective is that would be the number of people that it would take to fill Lambeau Field over 61,000 times. That's some pretty significant reach.
Definitely. I really like to boil down the reach on social media because you really can't capture how much it is through your phone. Somebody might say, "Oh, I only had 300 people in my live stream." Imagine filling a room with 300 people. That's a lot. But then when you put it into the perspective of the Trump team reaching 5 billion people, you have to boil that down into something tangible. And, football stadiums are the biggest venues where people gather. So 61,000 times in Lambeau Field, that is incredible. Of course, go Pack. We love to reference the home team. But it's important to put it in tangible numbers that people can understand because people can't even fathom going to that venue 61,000 times. During a year, you would have to go there. I think it's like 20 times a day or something like that. It's a large number, and you'd have to have that turnover in the stadium. So thinking about that reach on social media is just astronomical.
So let me ask you this, Maria. The question of immediacy, like when it comes to breaking news versus accuracy, is there a trade-off that takes place here? The faster the news gets to us, do we give up some accuracy in return for the immediacy of it?
That is really the age-old question when it comes to the internet. It is that speed and accuracy. Like, people want to be first. They want to be first, and they will do so, and they'll say sorry later. That's kind of what the mantra has been. And there is a huge trade-off that you kind of see that even when something spreads on social media, usually something that, maybe is exaggerated or, a stretch might travel first and farther than the actual truth. And you can kind of see that in news as well. So I would caution folks to take their time and make sure that, they are doing their due diligence, but also, get it out there quickly so people can make their opinion on it, but make sure it doesn't snowball out of control.
Well, and we've had a big learning experience during the COVID pandemic. There was, I think, a very open attempt to throttle information that was not, officially, approved. And, I know a lot of us paid a price. If we said something that went against what health authorities suggested, they'd shut us down or warn us or whatever. But I'm going to use X as an example. The immediacy of news on there means that, sometimes some bad information comes through, but I'm not going to say lack of, because I think there is some throttling there, but the free flow of information makes it easier to correct those mistakes when they do pop up.
I think that usually what the truth is and what the consensus is usually rises to the top. And we see that across platforms. And you saw from all the COVID stuff, you saw all these platforms backpedaling. You saw Facebook, you saw YouTube, you saw all of that happening in that instance. But I think that people are generally good stewards. And of course, you have some bad actors, but people are generally good stewards and want to find the truth.
So I'm sorry, we only have about 30 seconds left, but if you had advice for the GOP as we're moving forward, what would it be?
My advice for the GOP when it comes to the midterms is embrace new media. Legacy media, while it's there, embrace new media, embrace creators on the local level. They might not have to have, 1 million followers, 100,000 followers. Maybe they're your micro influencer. Embrace that mom who's making cooking videos at home and showcase your message through people like that.
Okay. Exciting times. I mean, a lot is changing. AI, of course, plays into this as well, but that's a subject for another time. Again, we're talking with Maria Giannopoulos. Maria, where can people find your work online? Where can they follow you on social media?
Absolutely. You can find me on all platforms at Greek Maria. I'm really proud of my Greek roots, so you can find me there.
All right. Thank you so much for being our guest today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Awesome. Talk soon.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Lora Karch back to the program. Lora, I know that some people are going to recognize your name and your voice as soon as they hear you. For those who are meeting you for the first time, though, take a moment to tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. My name is Lora Karch. As you said, I am a Middle East affairs analyst and senior contributor for Young Voices. And yeah.
All right. And you actually have I think in our past conversations, you've done a great job of, keeping your finger on the pulse of what is happening, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. Venezuela. This was all over the news toward the end of the year and the first of the new year, with the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Where do we stand on this right now? What is happening in Venezuela? I'll admit, my attention has wandered since then. Other things have pulled me away. But is Venezuela, are they considered a friend or foe? Are things stable there, or is that still something very much undecided?
So a bit of a recap. Yes, it was on January 3rd when U.S. forces went into Caracas. And, they went in during the night. They captured the president, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife. And they brought him back to the U.S. With no U.S. military deaths. So it was a very stealthy but quiet operation, very controversial. At this point, there is an interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, who actually recently met this month with one of our U.S. envoys to restore diplomatic relations because there were a bit of a mixed reviews on how that happened and why that happened. But many diaspora that I'm, seeing on the internet and talking to are actually happy that this happened. Maduro was a known dictator. Get all that. But on the other end of it, there are many having the philosophical conversation about, whether or not the U.S. has a right to go in there, snatch their leader, and bring him back without any consequences.
Yeah, I love that you frame it in the consequences because they're unknown. There are unintended consequences that come sometimes. Case in point, I look clear back to 1953, Operation Ajax, in which regime change was effected in Iran, and President Mossadegh was deposed with the help of U.S. and British intelligence, and the Shah was installed, and that came back to hit the U.S. very hard in 1979. So I'm not necessarily saying Venezuela looks like it's going to be another worst case scenario, but we really don't know where this all leads, do we?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the historical significance because historically, U.S. regime change over the world has not gone over well. Syria, Iraq, and as you pointed out, Iran, we actually installed a leader that led to another coup and takeover of the country by today's Ayatollah, known Islamists, and now it's been 40 years, I believe 47 years. And of course, as we've seen historically, it never ends well for the civilians, which is what, in my opinion, the U.S. is failing to prioritize right now. As far as the direct regional consequences go, refugee surges, that includes possible cartel expansion. Venezuela is known for its cartels, as is our neighbor Mexico, with, that stuff going on right now. So I think it would pose more of an infrastructural strain on our own resources if we end up, going in there conventionally, with more bombings and things like that. Recently, I did do a border visit to Yuma, and I was speaking with the local leaders and border chiefs, and they spoke to us about the migrant surge during the Biden administration. And they mentioned, what people forgot about mostly was the local strain. Local hospitals, food banks, they took the biggest hit. And I think that's one thing that we are forgetting. If this war continues, or if it becomes a full-blown war, it would cause another migrant surge, among other things. And I don't believe the U.S. can afford that right now.
No, that's a very good point. It's a lot easier for us to excuse unintended consequences, when they're on the other side of the world, but when they're in this hemisphere, they could very well become our problem. So tell me this: does the current administration have a clear path forward, or if they do, are they just not being open about where they'd like to go from here now that Maduro is out of the picture?
So I can't speak on behalf of the people or the administration, but I do see that it is a good thing that the interim president is meeting with US diplomats to restore some kind of diplomacy here, some sort of maybe democratic path forward. In my opinion, I do believe the path forward should be pragmatic at this point, little to no military usage. And I do think economic incentives work best. Venezuela is not that great economically right now. Anything from sanctions relief to any similar incentives in exchange for some concrete political concessions. Today, actually, I believe it came out that the president granted amnesty for political prisoners for the past 2 decades or so who were against Maduro. So that's a step in the right direction. But I do believe we need to be way more pragmatic, install more mediation and traditional forms of diplomacy right now. What we need is immediate de-escalation, clear communication of limits. We need a plan. And it looks like the U.S. doesn't really have one at this point, other than oil deals.
How does this affect other countries? And I'm thinking specifically of Colombia and Brazil, who are in much closer proximity to Venezuela. These are not just little backwater South American or Central American countries that nobody cares about. These are huge economies, and it seems like they have a pretty big stake in all of this as well.
One of the main concerns at this point is the prevention of spillover. Again, the cartels and the people still loyal to Maduro, the Colombia and Brazil can provide avenues for that to continue. And again, I think the U.S. as one of the key players in this situation, there needs to be some sort of regional mediation, extend that to Colombia and Brazil and other countries to prevent any retaliation or spillover or risk of our own people and resources. Sorry.
And not to put you on the spot here, Lora, but I really want to get your take because I believe you are far better informed on this than I am. To what degree was the removal of Maduro about natural resources, be it oil, be it silver, or anything like that, versus, just national security and we don't want, Russia getting too frisky in our hemisphere or anything like that?
Well, given Trump's comments about the stolen oil before he went in, it's hard for Americans not to believe that it is about the resources. I think since then, they've done a good job about the diplomacy part, but we could be doing much, much more. Installing frameworks to extend a hand past the natural resource deals. We need to, again, speak to countries around Venezuela and see what the people think as well of Venezuela. We need to establish communication with them, not just the government or the interim government per se. But I don't believe that we should continue being aggressive with Venezuela. Again, removing Nicolás Maduro, having an interim president, it doesn't stop it does not equal immediate stability. We had a removal without a transition plan, and it's still possible, I think, to have a dangerous power vacuum if the thing with the interim president does not go well.
Well, and there's the refugee question as well, simply because where there's a vacuum, we don't know what interests may want to fill that. And you had referenced briefly, what's going on in Mexico right now. That's probably a pretty good example of, okay, so the bad guy is gone, but the problem isn't.
Exactly. Venezuela is still in our hemisphere. It's very close to home. The consequences would hit our own borders directly. So I don't think escalation would be smart at this point.
Is the U.S. likely to find its way back to a place where we have that commerce and engagement with other nations minus the military intervention?
I like to hope so. When it comes to Venezuela, I do think recently the administration has turned its attention to Iran and possibly Mexico next. I think we're all just waiting to see what happens. But yeah.
Their dance card is getting pretty full. I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that.
The 2026 bingo card. Yes.
Again, we're talking with Lora Karch. She is a Young Voices contributor. Lora, where can people find you and follow you on social media?
I am mainly on X, at first and last name, Lora Karch.
Lora spelled Lora.
Correct,
Lora,
yes.
Thanks for being our guest. Great to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome a new contributor this week. Tyler Turman joins us. Tyler, take just a moment for those who are meeting you for the first time to tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background.
Yes, Brian, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here. So I am an economics and political science graduate from the University of Washington. I'm a Seattle native, and I'm currently working public policy research in Washington, D.C. My main areas of focus are on poverty, economic and social mobility, and welfare policy.
Boy, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm looking at an article you've written for the dailyeconomy.org. Are transfers replacing work for America's poor? And I want to get some clarification here. Transfers. We're talking about, money transfers like EBT, electronic benefits transfer. What all is included under that umbrella of transfers?
Yes. So the federal government spends about $1 trillion each year on what are called means-tested benefits. And these are transfers that specifically go to low-income households. So that's what they're ostensibly meant to target. So we're thinking about programs like Medicaid, food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental Social Security income. So these are the main transfers that we think about. So when I talk about transfers in my article, I'm talking specifically about the welfare programs that we typically think about when we think about government programs that are targeted towards the poor.
And we're going to explore the question of does today's welfare system encourage mobility or does it entrench dependency? Give us some scope or some scale to understand. I have a perception, but I haven't crunched the numbers, but my perception is that the numbers must keep getting bigger and bigger. Is that borne out by the facts? Are there more people receiving these benefits than ever before?
Yes. So we have around 99 million Americans relying on means-tested welfare programs as of about 2018, I think is the most recent data that we have that I used. So more Americans are reliant on government transfers than ever before at any point in our nation's history. And what I did in my paper, or my blog post specifically, was looking at this recent report by the Congressional Budget Office, which basically releases an annual report on the distribution of household income. And one of the things they look at are the different components, total income for households and different income quintiles going back to 1979. And so this includes market income, which includes like work from employment or investments or whatever it might be. And they also look at means-tested transfers, which are transfers from government programs, like I mentioned before. They also look at taxes, for example. And what I found is the total income for households in the lowest income quintile rose quite substantially, but most of the increase was due to government transfers, not from market income, which means that the poorest households are becoming increasingly reliant on government handouts rather than employment.
And just to put this in perspective, in 1964, when President Johnson launched the war on poverty, I don't believe his stated goal was to get as many people on these benefits as possible, was it?
Absolutely not. So LBJ famously said that the goal of the welfare state or the war on poverty was to turn tax eaters into taxpayers. That's the way that he put it. And Thomas Sowell talks about this in Vision of the Anointed, where the goal of the welfare state and the war on poverty, ostensibly speaking, was meant to be a way to reduce government dependency. He sold it as a way for the American public to say, okay, we're going to have this higher spending now, but it's going to be a high yield investment where if we spend money on these welfare programs now, we're going to be able to encourage people to eventually become independent and self-sufficient, and then they won't have to rely on any government transfers. So it was meant to say, if we have higher spending now, we'll have lower spending later. But of course, 60 years of hindsight shows that it's been the exact opposite.
Yeah, that's the key that just blows me away is the idea that people would be put in a position where they could better themselves, they could pull themselves out of dependency. It's not happening. In fact, it appears, or at least it feels like, the exact opposite is taking place.
Absolutely, yes. And that sort of requires a reckoning of how we measure success for our welfare programs. When we look at many debates over welfare policy, especially amidst the One Big Beautiful Bill Act's welfare reforms, a lot of the complaints that we heard from people on the left were how many people were going to be reduced from the caseloads, how many people were not going to be on Medicaid and SNAP, how many people were going to lose their welfare benefits and no longer be able to benefit from the program. But caseloads and how many people are reliant on government benefits should not be the way we measure success for our welfare programs. It should be how many people are getting off of welfare programs and becoming independent and self-sufficient, which was the goal of our welfare programs when they were first brought out. And ironically speaking, Joe Biden, before the 1996 welfare reforms, famously said that we must replace the culture of welfare with the culture of work. But that message, of course, seems to have been lost in the halls of Congress today.
Okay, so Tyler, tell me, what is the incentive for politicians to not only maintain the status quo of the people on those welfare rolls, but actually to grow the number of people on those rolls? What's in it for those in power?
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of incentive misalignments when it comes to welfare programs. So for starters, politicians are able to appear generous when they talk about how I'm bringing on so many more people onto Medicaid rolls, and so many people are becoming covered because of, for example, the Obamacare expansions. So they appear generous to their constituents when they're pointing out how many people are benefiting from our government handouts. And then when any politician proposes even moderate reforms like expanding work requirements or requiring people to verify for their eligibility more often, they'll frequently attack those people saying they're going to cut benefits or people, they're going to take people off of these programs who rely on them so heavily. And so they're able to attack people who are wanting to get people off of welfare programs. So that's part of the main role, is the sort of incentive misalignment where people measure success by caseloads. But the other thing too is states have very little incentive to actually prioritize improving long-term outcomes like independence, employment, self-sufficiency, and getting people off of the welfare programs, because states largely administer welfare programs, but they're funded largely by the federal government, which means that states are running programs that are funded mostly with other people's money. And so naturally, as anyone would assume, when you're spending other people's money, you're not going to really care where that money is going towards or if it actually fulfills the program's goals. And that's sort of a structural problem that we have with our welfare state as a whole that unfortunately has not been solved.
I think you referenced Thomas Sowell a little bit earlier, and I seem to recall him talking about intentions versus results at some point. And I have no doubt there were good intentions, when the war on poverty was launched. But if we were to judge it based on results, it seems like it's time to change tactics at the very least.
Absolutely, yes. Good intentions are not a substitute for bad economics, no matter how much moral grandstanding or political rhetoric that you might espouse. That's simply the reality of the situation that we're in right now. And so doubtless, as you pointed out before, there are many people who work in the welfare state or run these programs who have really good intentions and who really want to help the poor people. But the question is, what is the best way to go about helping these people? And the argument that I ultimately believe is not going to be through government wealth transfers and wealth redistribution. The National Bureau of Economic Research actually published a paper just last month that showed how the greatest decline in poverty actually occurred before the advent of the war on poverty in 1964. And much of that decrease is actually caused by economic growth, employment, and wage growth, which of course are all byproducts of the free market and economic growth. It's not because of government handouts. And what we actually see is when we include all components of income, absolute poverty was actually stagnating in terms of the decline from actually starting in the 1970s. And so we're spending more and more money on these welfare programs, but we're really getting less bang for our buck when it comes to actually administering results.
Tyler, we've only got about 1 minute left, but I have to throw this question out to you. I hear talk about AI ushering in an era where, I don't know if it'll be through universal basic income or something, but Elon Musk is talking about we're going to reach a point where people won't have to work for money. Have you heard any of these kind of comments? And if so, I'd love to get your take on, is that feasible?
When it comes to artificial intelligence, I think the main concern right now is how many people are going to be displaced by the advent of artificial intelligence. And as a result, we need to have more welfare programs to cover workers who are displaced by these programs. Andrew Yang actually talked about this before with a former UBI back when he was running for president. I don't see artificial intelligence as much of a problem when it comes to displacing workers en masse. I think what we're going to see is more structural change in terms of what types of jobs are going to be available for workers, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. I don't think it's a justification for expanded welfare benefits.
Well, I've appreciated the insights that you've offered on this subject, and maybe that's a topic we can visit at a later point. Again, we're talking with Tyler Turman. He is a Young Voices contributor, and I'd ask you, for those who want to follow your work and follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yes, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Tyler Turman, Turman. You can also track some of my work on my Substack at Politics in Praxis.
All right. Great to have you on the program. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. Happy to welcome a new contributor. Her name is Priyanka Venkat. Priyanka, welcome to the show. For those who are meeting you for the first time, take a moment and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Priyanka. I'm a researcher and Young Voices contributor here in Washington, D.C. Originally from Miami, Florida, I write on issues related to civil governance, local governance, and civil liberties.
Now, Priyanka, I don't think you would be embarrassed if I were to tell our listening audience that you are a football fan. And that's relevant because we're going to be talking about some football-related things. If you'd like to give a shout-out to your team, here's a great opportunity.
See, I would shout out the Miami Dolphins, but I'm not particularly happy with them at this point. So instead, I'll shout out the Washington Commanders, who this article is about.
Okay, and this is about the title of the article is Why Taxpayers Foot the Bill for a DC Stadium. And I know that this is not a concern just in DC, but I've heard this concern expressed in many other cities as well. Why do the taxpayers have to, take part in this? Set the stage for us, if you will, though, about what's happening in Washington, DC, and why there is talk and controversy surrounding a new football stadium.
Yeah, first of all, you're absolutely right that DC is not just an isolated issue, but DC is perhaps the latest in what we call a stadium boom. So every couple of years or so, the last one being the 1990s to early 2000s, a lot of sports teams decide, hey, our stadium is getting a little bit old. We want to bring in new, fresh property and make updates to these stadiums. So they push for the creation of brand new stadiums to keep up with consumer demand and just to revitalize the team's spirit. The issues with that are not so much that as a sports fan, you want a new stadium. The issue is not so much that. The issue is more how they pay for it. So teams on net, there's this trend that's been going on where teams on net ask the city in which they are currently residing in to pay for these stadiums. That means that the Washington Commanders, who just this last year saw a $3.7 billion deal, had the Washington, D.C. Council and the Washington, D.C. taxpayers subsidize these stadiums with, in D.C.'s case, a $1.1 billion subsidy. Billion-dollar subsidy. So teams in general, they love this because they don't have to pay for this. So when cities step in, and cities want to step in, it's a sense of national pride. It's an idea of legacy for these mayors and these city officials that they got this stadium to happen. And teams come in, and it's a great deal for them because they get subsidized leases. For example, DC, the Washington Commanders on this new RFK site, they have a $1 annual lease and a 50-year property tax holiday. That is a great deal. And why would they not want to take it? Cities are offering these deals because of two reasons. One, they can control the tools of development. They own the land, so they're able to, through zoning or through restrictions, deal out who gets the good deal, usually stadiums and teams, and who gets bad deals, usually other developers who could have come in. And they say this because they want the sense of civic pride in their city, and they want these legacies, so they offer these sort of sweetheart deals for teams who obviously would take it because otherwise they threaten to leave. Like, let's say the Las Vegas Raiders, who used to be the Oakland Raiders a couple of years back, if people can remember, they left for $1 million deal at Allegiant Stadium, and the Oakland Coliseum is just sitting in ruins. So it's not so much that the teams are pushing for these big deals, because they are, but it is, on the other hand, the cities are willing to bend over backwards to let these deals happen.
Okay, so let's talk incentives. Why do the cities become, and for that matter, in this case, the federal government too, why are they so generous in making this possible? I mean, the taxpayers, I don't see them out there, protesting, hey, we'll pay extra if you'll just give us this stadium. It seems like they don't have a lot of choice, but what's in it for, the cities or the municipalities there?
So, if you look at it from a city official's perspective, creating a stadium is this big tangible project. So when they leave their term, they have this tangible project that they've created for the taxpayers, apparently for the city, and that gets them a lot of clout. That gives that pushes up their reputation and leaves behind their legacy. So Mayor Muriel Bowser in DC, she was the one who pushed for the initial legislation to get that land transferred back to DC. She even pushed senators to make sure the decision was unanimous, and that decision went through, and in January 2025, President Biden at that time signed it into law. So on one hand, you have the city officials, they want these legacy projects, and they justify these legacy projects through this idea of future economic revenue. They say that because a city will bring in a stadium, it serves as an anchor point for development. You create all these mixed-use developments around the stadium, concession stands or team merch, or just a general sense of pride in a city, gets more people moving to the city, we raise property taxes, all of that. Those are sort of the revenue-based ideas for why a city might push for a team to come in. The issue is most of these are false pretenses. These are false premises on the idea of this future revenue, because when you think about land, especially the RFK Stadium land, which was locked away for 68 years, no development was able to happen. It was federal land, so developers who may have wanted to come in, it's prime waterfront land. You have a nice Anacostia River view. Developers who would have wanted to come in couldn't, in the sense, and because the land was locked away. So you have this idea of cities coming in and blocking off development and trying to create these legacy projects, and they do that through this false justification of future revenues. Even in places where you have, like the Washington, D.C. deal, you have the stadium and you have a mixed-use development coming with it, but the D.C.'s own Center for Financial, the CFO for the budget of D.C. essentially says, hey, if we just created a mixed-use development in the first place, you don't need to spend this much. The revenue would be higher than if the stadium was created. So it's not just this idea, it's this false idea, essentially, that the stadium creates these future revenues and creates a sense of civic pride when all it's doing is harming the taxpayers funding it and forcing us, the people, the residents of Washington, D.C., to pay for these stadiums instead of paying for businesses that we would like to go and spend money on.
Now, you give in your article an example of a stadium where that wasn't the case. And I'm talking about the Los Angeles Rams. Talk to me about how they did it differently.
Absolutely. So Rams owner Steve Kroenke, he followed the usual market process. He wasn't favored because he was a stadium owner. And the reason he did that was because Californians and California are very against these ideas of the stadium deal. They were pushback from officials and pushback from taxpayers themselves. So Kroenke had to go the normal business route as if he was any other developer. And doing that, he made a bid for this prime land that's being sold by, I believe, some Hollywood Park Association or something of the sort. So they made a private transaction for him to buy the land, and him as team owner completely self-financed the land. No public funding, no taxpayer cuts, no taxpayer subsidies, just private funding. And he was able to do that because he took on the risk of doing that. He, as a developer, came in, said, I want to create this and I'm going to take the risks. And he even paid over the proposed budget, which is what typically happens with stadiums, out of his own pocket. And now that stadium, the SoFi Stadium, is set to host the Super Bowl this year, next year. Last year, and then the 2022 Super Bowl, and then the upcoming Super Bowl next year.
So I'm guessing, well, I don't know. Did the taxpayers in Los Angeles, did they throw a party for Mr. Kroenke? Or maybe they should, because it sounds like he really did this in a thoughtful way that didn't just place the burden at their feet and say, here you go. You can thank me later.
Absolutely. No, I think the taxpayers in California, well, there are many reasons for them to gripe about living in California, but the stadium is not one of them. The stadium, they can go and enjoy it and spend their money on it knowing that it's something that they want to spend their money on. That the people who want to enjoy football can spend the money supporting the stadium, not the people in DC. That's not the case.
Again, we are talking with Priyanka Venkat. She is a researcher and Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
So I am on the Mutual Persuasion Substack, and then also you can find me on X at @Pri_Venkat.